So in 1973, there were 250,000 children in India who died of smallpox. I want you to think about that for just a moment. There were places where the outbreak was so bad that no one could go into a village. Trains did not run. It was a terrible time, and people were very worried and very fearful. The Shitala Ma temples were filled with people begging that their family, their children, would not be affected by smallpox. I see a lot of you nodding, remembering those days, or you've seen the people with their pockmarks on their face.
But in the big cities, many people were totally unaware that this was a problem. If you were in Bombay or Delhi or Calcutta, maybe you had no idea that there was so much smallpox. Unlike today, where we have internet and video, we are all too aware of how big the problem is.
We were sitting with Maharaj-ji in Vrindavan, and one day he called us, and he used to call me Dr. America. And he said, Dr. America, come here. And he said that there is a terrible epidemic of smallpox. But he said that this epidemic of smallpox will be eradicated. He said, Is khatra mahamari unmulan ho jayega, khatam ho jayega. And he said that it was God's will that smallpox would be conquered because of the hard work of all of the wonderful health workers who were working hard. He said that God would pull this one form of suffering off of the shoulders of humanity and that it would be eradicated. And then he said something absolutely preposterous. He said that Girija and I should leave the ashram and that we should go into New Delhi and we should present ourselves at the World Health Organization and that we should work in the program to eradicate smallpox. And he took his arm out and he did this to show what vaccination looks like. That's not the way you vaccinate against polio, but that is the way you vaccinate against smallpox. And he said, Dr. America is going to go village by village and vaccinate children. And Dr. America is going to become UNO doctor, United Nations Organization doctor. So Girija and I went to Indraprastha Estate, which is where the WHO office was. And we presented ourselves at the front door because Maharaj-ji had told us that we should go work for the World Health Organization. The problem is that we came to the WHO office wearing our clothes from the ashram. And I had hair down to the middle of my back. And I had a beard like this. So what did the WHO office do when they met Dr. America? Of course, they kicked us out, both of us.
But very nicely.
But we kept going back because every time we'd go back to the ashram, and Maharaj-ji would say, to tumhara job mil gaya? Tumhara kaam mil gaya? Have you met your job? Have you got your job? And we'd say, no, Baba, no, Baba. WHO doesn't want us. And he would say, Wapas, jao, 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 ekdam, jao. And he would kick us out. And we would go back, and sometimes we'd go back from Kenshi, which you know would be, it'd be a taxi, and then it would be a train, and then it would be a rickshaw, and then it would be a taxi. And we went back about a dozen times. And each time we went back, that long beard, I trimmed it a little bit. And that hair, I trimmed it a little bit. And many of you may remember Mr. Barman.
Yes, he gave you a jacket.
And Mr. Vaish and Sony, these wonderful buggets of Maharaj-ji. They would help me by giving me a jacket and a tie and a shirt. And every once in a while, I would clean up a little bit. And I would keep going to WHO. And every time I would go in, they would look at me with amusement that how could this hippie coming from an ashram become part of the World Health Organization. And in fact, they would say to me in my papers when I had to sign up, they said, where have you come from? Have you been deputed from Harvard, from Oxford? And I would say, no, I am deputed from Neem Karoli Baba Ashram in Nainital. And that's what my papers said, is that I was a delegate of Maharaj-ji to work for the United Nations to eliminate this disease that God had said would be eradicated. And one day we showed up, Maharaj-ji said, go immediately, this minute, right now. And we showed up at the office of WHO, and there was an American sitting there. It was the first American I had seen in the WHO office. And I walked in and he said to me, oh, hello, you look like an American. And I said, yes. He said, what do you do? I said, I'm a doctor. And I know what he thought. He thought, well, you don't look like a doctor. I said, I'm a doctor. He said, but why are you here? And remember, this is WHO, very serious place. We were not so serious. And he said, why are you here? And I said, well, my guru, Neem Karoli Baba, in the foothills of the Himalayas, where we've been living in an ashram, he told me that I'm supposed to come and join WHO and that we were going to eradicate smallpox because this is God's will. It is God's will that smallpox is going to be eradicated. And this wonderful scientist, his name was D.A. Henderson, he looked at us with incredulity that I was saying it was God's will. And my guru had said that smallpox was going to be eradicated.
And this is a gentleman who was 6'4", chain smoked cigarette. He looked like a football coach. He was not someone who was really a big believer in Indian Dharma.
And I went back and told Maharaj-ji, I don't think I'm ever going to get this job. I just don't think it's going to work out. They're not going to hire this hippie from the Neem Karoli Baba ashram to work to help eradicate smallpox. And in fact, D.A. Henderson has said, it's nice that you're here. It's nice that your guru says that smallpox is going to be eradicated, but we don't have a program to eradicate smallpox in India. The Indian government had not yet agreed. He said, I'm here to see Indira Gandhi to try to persuade her that we should have a program to eradicate smallpox in India. So we went back to see Maharaj-ji, and he said, who is this man who told you that smallpox was not going to be eradicated? Who is this man who told you you were not going to get your job? I said, his name was Henderson. And Maharaj says, Kya baat? Kya? What is his name? And I said, Henderson. And Maharaj-ji did this thing that he would do. He closed his eyes and he said, Henderson? He said, spell it for me. Henderson. Sabti ko jayega. Ciao, ciao, ciao. And he said, go back immediately. And of course, I got my job.
But you forgot meeting Nicole
And
in Pakistan.
Yes. Why don't you tell that story?
Well, sure. My mother came to visit us in India, and we brought her to Vrindavan, and she was not happy being in Vrindavan, and she insisted that we leave. Maharaj-ji knew she was coming and told her she was coming, but she really resisted meeting Maharaj-ji, and so instead, we took her on a tour of Rajasthan, and we were in a very fancy palace hotel in Udaipur with my mother, and who should be there but Nicole Grasset, who was in India running the smallpox program, who was so astonished to see us there and knew that Larry had been applying for the job. And years later, after Larry was working for WHO, she said to me, I don't know what made me hire Larry. Maybe it was your teacher talking to me. So it was both seeing her by accident in Rajasthan and seeing DA, that all those things ultimately led to us being accepted to work for WHO.
So here's what I want you to know, I think, about Maharaj-ji and how he works. We had a WHO Jeep, a United Nations, big United Nations seal on the Jeep. But we put a picture of Maharaj-ji on the front, right over the steering wheel, big picture of Maharaj-ji, which you're not supposed to do. It's defacing United Nations property. It's very naughty. But every time we would go into a village or go to see a civil surgeon or see a district magistrate, and I would go in, a very earnest young man, and I would say, we're going to eradicate smallpox. Just like I would say to you today, we're going to conquer COVID. I know how hard it is. I know how hard it is on this Guru Purnima to be cooped up. I saw some people wearing masks. You must wear your mask when you're outside. It's difficult, but it was more difficult then because smallpox was a worse disease. And we would go with our UN Jeep and go to see the district magistrate and say, please help us. We want to eradicate smallpox. It's so important that the children don't suffer and die from this terrible disease. And the district magistrate or the civil surgeon would see this young American and it would say something like, yes, 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 Abi Atahe, Abi Atahe. Help is just now coming. Help is just now coming. And he would take us out to the car to say goodbye and to send us on our way. And then he would see the picture of Maharaj-ji. And he would look at the picture and he would say this wonderful Indian way of saying things. He would point to the picture of Maharaj-ji and he would say, who is he? And who is he to you? And that would give us a chance to say, Maharaj-ji is our guru. He said that smallpox would be eradicated. And he said that it was God's will, sab ichahe. It's God's will that smallpox will be eradicated. And then he said, Maharaj, Neem Karoli Baba predicted that smallpox would be eradicated. And I would say, yes. And he would say, come in and have some tea. And we would go and sit down with him and we'd have tea. And by the time we left, we had more Jeeps, we had more doctors. We were able to mount a successful program. And you should know that the last case of smallpox in the world was a young girl named Rahima Banu in a village called Karalia in Barishal near Patuakhali in Bangladesh. And when the scabs from her smallpox fell off of her and the sun killed those viruses, that was the end of a chain of transmission of a disease that went back to the pharaohs. 10,000 years of smallpox. It killed 50 kings and queens and emperors and 500 million people, much more than COVID. It killed 2 million people in the Summer of Love in 1967. And at one point, India, the states of Uttar Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh and Bihar and West Bengal had 95% of all the smallpox in the world. That's when Neem Karoli Baba predicted that smallpox would be eradicated. And I think it's fair to say that you probably know about the Seva Foundation, which is the organization that Girija and I and many other buckets of Maharaj-ji began after we eradicated smallpox. And Seva has now given back sight to more than 5 million blind people, all Maharaj-ji's will, all because of Maharaj-ji's grace.